What's up, guys? I have another part to my controller mod series of videos. And this part, I finally got around to adding the extra button on the bottom of the controller. As you can see here, I'm not really a huge fan of the push button that I use, just because there isn't really any positive feeling to when you've actually pressed it. Like, you can press it slightly and it doesn't actually short out the contacts until you press it down all the way. Because what happens is when I'm holding it, I have to press down really hard on it, and after a while it just kind of wears away at your fingers. Unfortunately, Radio Shack didn't really have a good variety of small switches. They had really tiny ones that were made for surface mount boards, and then they also had really large ones which, you know, would be really comfortable to press and also had more of a tactile feeling to it. But in that case, like, it wouldn't really comfortably fit in this section of the controller. I'd probably have to put the button all the way down here after I've removed the motors for the vibrator, the vibration. And I'm not really too happy about where I place this button, just because it's kind of in between my middle and ring fingers from where I normally grip the controllers. And what happens is I have to kind of modify my grip a little to either have my middle finger over it or my ring finger. And it's a little uncomfortable. It makes it a little more difficult for me to be really accurate at long ranges, but up close it really doesn't matter. I also went ahead and sprayed a few coats of plastic dip spray on it, and it really gives it a nice grippy feeling. At first I didn't really like it. It felt kind of weird to me, but after getting used to it, it's really nice. Like, it really doesn't help with when I'm gaming, just because generally when I'm playing, you know, Xbox, my hands don't really get sweaty and it's not really that slick. But, you know, the grip is nice, especially compared to like the front, which is what the back used to feel like. When I'm just holding the controller, it won't slip out of my hand. You know, controllers I've dropped several times just because, like, I'm not really careful, I'm not really holding it on tight, and it just kind of falls out of my hands. The only bad thing about what I did was that, you can see here, I didn't use a primer and it's starting to peel, especially around the edges where it's basically rubbing up against my palm. And for those of you who don't know, you know, Plastic Dip, they normally make a dip, but they also sell a spray, and this spray I think can cover 5 square feet. And it was pretty cheap, it was only like $6, and I did 3 coats on here. And it's not overly thick, but you still get that nice texture. I'm not really sure if the primer would have helped with this. You know, like, I went to Home Depot and the only primer I saw nearby was the Rust-Oleum primer, but Plastic Dip says on their website that, you know, Rust-Oleum primer isn't compatible with their product, so I didn't even bother. I might try, you know, peeling. One nice thing about Plastic Dip is you can just peel it off if you don't like it, and it won't really do anything to the surface. And I might just try lightly sanding it to give it more surface area for it to hold onto, and hopefully get rid of this. Or I might just kind of tape over here and just have it towards this back area here and where my fingers would be, just so there's nothing really rubbing up against the edge of it to roll it. In terms of installing the button, you know, I traced it and I found a few vias that I could have gotten a wire to. But, like, the most ideal via was kind of underneath the trigger assembly, and I really didn't want to deal with having to get that out. So I just went right ahead and I did it the cheap way and went right to the button pad. It's not the greatest. And actually I used pretty thick wire. I couldn't really find anything thinner gauge. And I think this is probably, what is it, like, probably, I don't know. I don't remember offhand. It's either 18, 20, or 22. That's what I had most readily available at work. Engineering uses some stuff, but I felt it was way too thin. And one bad thing about going right to the pad with the button and soldering it to that black pad underneath is that it makes this button kind of mushy. You can hear, like, the sound is a little different. It's not a big deal, but it definitely isn't as tactile as the other buttons. But in all honesty, I've been trying to practice to use this button more than this button. Although I still go to this button just out of muscle memory and habit. But I'll just pop this open and you guys can see. Let's take the battery pack off. Try not to, oh, right. And of course, my backspacer is kind of messing with me and making it so I can't take the back cover off. But you can see I also switched screws to this. It's not in the way as much and I could turn this easier. I am getting used to this, just like kind of tapping at the trigger, but I'm still not really happy with it, and right now I have it backed off all the way. Okay, so I'm gonna keep it like this so the buttons don't fly off. And so set that to the side. And you see right here what I did was I went right to the pad, and that's why the button feels mushy, because the rubber piece here has to kind of compress even more to get past this solder. It's a pretty big ball of solder, but I didn't want it to, since I was going to this pad, I didn't want the solder connection to break off as I'm pushing the B button down and rubbing up against it. And what I did was I just took some, I took a small X-Acto blade and I just kind of scraped away at the black coating, put a nice blob of solder on it, you know, pre-tinned my wire, and just applied heat with the wire to that point and got the solder on there. And as you can see here in the back, well, maybe you can't see, it's quite dark, but I just went ahead, this is the ground point, which was really easy to solder to since there was already a blob of solder there, and I drilled out a hole sized for the switch. Flashlight help? Nah, not that much. And you know, the switch basically extends to this other side. These two wires, since I already have them in place, if I decide to switch on a different push button, I can always just unsolder the two leads on this push button and install something else. It's just a matter of, you know, drilling out a hole or cutting out a hole for whatever size switch I want. I was also thinking about actually attaching a piece of like aluminum sheeting or something to here that extends over this push button, so that when my middle finger rests in this area here, I can just push down on that plate and it'll push this entire button assembly down, and it also won't hurt my finger as much just because it won't be a fine point like this. Radio Shack actually had more of a lever based switch, but and it was, you know, it's very tactile. You could feel it clicking, you could hear it clicking, and you know, it was, the only problem I had with it was that it was rectangular and it would have been kind of difficult to actually cut out a hole for it. It wasn't made for you to actually put onto a into a surface like this. It was made for you to put onto a board and just have that as a push button with maybe something covering the entire thing. But you know, that was one problem, is just cutting out a nice rectangular hole on this curvy surface would have been very difficult. And also keeping it attached. It's not like this where the switch comes out in a smaller diameter and it's a larger diameter in the back, and you just put a lock nut in there to keep it in place. So it's a work in progress. I'll kind of see how well it goes. You know, I'm thinking about putting an A button on the other side, on the left side of the bottom trigger. Yeah, I could probably just, again, go right to the pad. There's a ground point on this end. I can run it through, you know, either this hole here or over the top of the board to this hole and then attach the switch there. I'm not sure yet. The push button I bought was a 2-pack, so I have a spare. And if I do want to, I might go ahead and do it. But since I've gone to the tactical layout, I've actually really knifed a lot less. Like, my reaction isn't even to knife first anymore. You know, whereas in Black Ops, since I played on default, I would get a lot of panic knives in, but now, like, I don't even do it, and it doesn't even matter if I have the button there. I just won't mentally push it. Instead, I'll try and win the really close-up gunfight, and it's something I lose very often. And even with the Onza, I never actually had a knifing button. I always set the triggers to jump, and I set the right bumper extra button to the right trigger, just for, you know, semi-automatic weapons like the FAL or, you know, the MK14, just because I felt that the Onza did have a much, like, mushier trigger. Like, the spring just wasn't that tight, and you couldn't really rapid fire as quickly with the triggers as you could on the regular Xbox controllers. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the series of videos. If I do any more updates to this controller, I'll put up an update video